The Blackwood inheritance. Why no heir survived past their 30th birthday. Section 1. An inheritance of stone and silence. 1781 to 1806. The first mention of Blackwood Hall in local records is quiet and unceremonious. A tax ledger from 1781, noting the transfer of a modest but respectable estate in the wooded Sussex countryside to a man named George Blackwood Sr., aged 42. The house, a square Georgian manor built of dark flint stone, stood atop a shallow ridge where mist liked to collect. In spring, the soil around it was chalky and poor, fit mostly for grazing sheep or birch woods. The villagers of nearby Thursby referred to the place as the Stone House in passing, if at all. Even in its earliest years, the manor seemed curiously unwelcomin. G.**. George Blackwood Sr. was a man of accounts. He had made his fortune not in land, but in ledgers. He had been a clerk in London's East India Company offices, though never stationed abroad, and after 3 decades of careful investment, he bought Blackwood Hall for retirement. He brought with him his wife, Eliza, and their only son, Edward, who was then 6. Local papers from 1782 noted the family's arrival without fanfare, save for a new iron gate and the planting of 4 blackthorn trees at the manor's corners. Curious choice in a region where apple trees and yews were more common. Edward was homeschooled by a stern, lisping tutor named Mr. Hollings, whose letters to a publisher preserved only in parts described the boy as precise, reluctant, play, and obsessed with counting things: birds in the sky, pebbles on a path, ticks of the long case clock. A solitary child, Edward roamed the woods alone, often barefoot, and developed a habit of drawing maps of the estate grounds over and over, each time from memory. The staff found it strange, but Eliza, who suffered from what modern physicians might call melancholia, encouraged anything that distracted him from the family shadows. By 1796, tragedy had already left its first mark. George Sr. died of what was officially listed as apoplexy, but which his manservant James called a sudden fall during supper. Eliza took to her room and never left it again, and Edward, now 21, assumed stewardship of the house. His inheritance included the house, the land, the ledgers, and, curiously, a locked iron box left by his father, which no one could open. It would remain sealed until 1843, when Edward's own son would finally pry it open. But more on that later. At 21, Edward had outlived his father's tenure, but not by much. He married late, at 27, to Margaret Wells, daughter of a wool merchant from Wiltshire. The union was not celebrated locally. There was an air of unease about Edward, who by then had developed peculiar routines. He measured everything: the length of the hallways, the width of dinner plates, the distance between windows. He read through his childhood maps, but this time with annotations, dates, numerals, and odd symbols in the margins. Their first son, Thomas, was born in the spring of 1806. Margaret died in childbirth. This fact, though tragic, was hardly unique for the time. What followed, however, was a curious and subtle series of events that no single person recorded, but which we can reconstruct from parish notes, servants' testimonies, and Edward's own account book, where he began writing not in pounds and shillings, but in time. Each entry was a countdown. Thomas, 3 years, 11 months to go. Thomas, 2 years, 5 months left. Thomas, 6 weeks. Then, nothing. No death certificate, no burial in the family plot. The boy simply vanished. When questioned, Edward gave no answer, only repeating that some clocks strike only once. He kept the boy's room sealed until his own death. The local curate noted that Edward never aged in spirit. He always seemed 29, even when his face lined with age. He died precisely 1 week after his 30th birthday, slumped in the same chair his father had fallen from. No cause could be determined. Was it madness? A family curse? Some hereditary illness no one understood? Or had Edward simply believed too strongly in something he had no name for? The villagers stopped speaking of the Blackwoods altogether. The manor fell silent again, waiting for the next heir. Section 2. The Iron Box and the Boy with the Clock. 1806 to 1836, when Edward Blackwood died in 1808, a full 7 days after his 30th birthday. The legal situation surrounding Blackwood Hall became complicated. There was no confirmed death certificate for young Thomas. Without a documented heir, and with Edward's last will consisting mostly of enigmatic notes and measurements written in the margins of a linen-bound ledger, the estate was held in trust by the local magistrate. It sat unoccupied for nearly 3 years. In 1811, the silence was broken. A distant cousin from Hampshire, Jonathan Blackwood, aged 29, petitioned for residency. He was a solicitor with a perfectly clean record and no known eccentricities. His claim was legitimate, albeit thin, based on an ancestral link traced to a Blackwood uncle who had emigrated to Canada but left no heirs. And so, in the absence of any other claimants, Jonathan was granted tenancy. Within weeks, the house showed signs of life again. Chimney smoke, cart deliveries, new servants hired from Thursby Village. Jonathan brought with him a wife, Claire, and a newborn son named Richard. For the first time in decades, Blackwood Hall heard the cries of a child and the clinking of glasses. The neighbors said it almost seemed like a normal house, though no one ever saw Jonathan at the tavern or church. He worked late into the night, and the lights in the study rarely went out before dawn. He claimed he was organizing the old account books and exploring the cellar archives for legal documents to clarify his claim to the estate. That cellar became an object of rumor. Servants whispered that it was not a wine vault, as presumed, but a long, narrow chamber of stone with iron hooks along the wall. A kind of private vault, sealed by an oak door older than the house itself. Claire asked about it once, only to be dismissed. One maid later recalled in a letter to her sister, "He watches the floor as if something is beneath it." But what kept resurfacing, year after year, was the iron box left by George Blackwood Sr. in 1796, the same one Edward had left untouched. Jonathan found it buried beneath a loose board in the library. It was cold to the touch even in July and bore no lock or seam. Every attempt to force it open failed. Its presence unnerved Claire so deeply that she asked for it to be removed. Jonathan refused. He placed it atop the stone fireplace in the study and surrounded it with blackthorn twigs. And then came the boy. Richard, born in 1810, was an unusually quiet child, pale of complexion with hair nearly white. He disliked sunlight and spent most of his time indoors, building elaborate towers of books and dominoes. Like Edward before him, he seemed to count everything shadows, raindrops, the cause of distant crows. Once, when he was 8, Claire overheard him whisper, "22 summers left." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I'll die when the moon forgets me," he replied. She didn't ask again. In 1829, Jonathan Blackwood turned 30. He celebrated quietly with a small supper for 3. That night, he wrote a note to the magistrate saying, "It is not madness, only measurement." He was found dead in his chair the next morning, no visible injury, no known illness. Claire fainted upon seeing him and spent the next decade in a quiet hospital outside Canterbury. The doctor's report listed grief, complicated by delusion. She died in 1834, still asking what the box was protecting. Richard, now 24 and alone in the hall, began a series of journal entries that survive in fragments. His penmanship is erratic. In one entry dated March 1833, he writes, "The box hums now, like bees in winter. I do not sleep. I dream the same thing. A room made of ticking clocks, each with my name. There are no hands on the faces, only black holes where time leaks out. By this point, the estate was in disrepair again. The staff dwindled to a cook, a manservant, and a gardener who tended only the blackthorn trees. In 1835, Richard turned 25 and began measuring every doorframe in the house, recording minute changes in their height and width. He read through the same map of the grounds over and over, just like his Uncle Edward had. 40 years earlier, the year 1836 brought heavy rains and flooded the lower woods. One morning in April, the manservant found Richard standing barefoot in the library, soaked through and staring at the iron box. He simply said, "It's counting down." That night, he locked himself in the study and burned every journal. The cook left the next day. Richard Blackwood died on July 14, 1840, just days after his 30th birthday. The cause was again undetermined. The coroner's report simply stated failure of the heart. But the servants, the villagers, and even the constable who removed the body all noted the same strange fact. Though the hearth was cold and untouched, the iron box had shifted. It now lay open, empty. No one could explain what had once been inside, nor why the floor beneath it, when pried up decades later, revealed a hollow It wasn't until 1843 that the house saw another heir. His name was Samuel Blackwood, the only son of Richard's younger brother, who had emigrated to Boston in 1812 and died at sea 10 years later. Samuel had been raised in America but returned to England after hearing of the inheritance. He was a bright, rational man, 32 years old, trained in natural philosophy and utterly skeptical of family legends. A self-proclaimed man of science, he had every intention of making the old place livable again. The village greeted him with polite suspicion. He laughed when someone mentioned the Blackwood age curse. In his diary later found in the attic, miraculously preserved, he wrote, "The air here is thick with fear and superstition. I wonder if the house is cursed or if the people have simply cursed it with their imaginations." The house, however, did not take kindly to being ignored. Samuel began by tearing down the blackthorn trees. Barbaric, he called them. He had the study cleaned, the stone cellar repaired, and the roof rattled. During the process, workers uncovered what appeared to be an old iron floor plate beneath the fireplace. Beneath that, they found a square pit filled with ash and a single, rusted hinge, the last remnant of the iron box that had stood in the same place for over 60 years. Whatever it had contained was now long gone. Samuel, ever practical, ordered the cavity filled in, but the trouble began with the maps. Among the books and old ledgers left behind, Samuel found nearly a dozen hand-drawn maps identical in outline, but marked with strange symbols and different notations. They were dated years apart and attributed to Edward, Richard, even Jonathan Blackwood. Most unsettling, however, was that the maps were not of the estate's grounds as they looked in real life, but as they might have been, decades before or after, with buildings that never existed, roads that curved strangely, and trees marked with dates instead of species. He dismissed it as the work of imaginative men going mad in isolation. But he too began drawing the map. It started in small ways, doodling in the margins of his notebooks, sketching rough outlines of the house from memory, then adding rooms that weren't there. A second staircase, a hidden passage behind the library. He began to dream of those places until he was convinced they once had been real. His journal entries shifted from reasoned observation to something more obsessive. Why do the walls feel closer today? I measured the dining room again. 2 inches shorter than last week. The clocks whisper when I sleep. Despite these mental intrusions, Samuel was determined to resist the Blackwood legacy. He hosted gatherings, opened the hall to guests, and tried to bring warmth to its cold reputation. In 1847, he even married an artist named Lydia, whom he had met during his studies in Edinburgh. She painted sunlit landscapes of the estate, though she never ventured beyond the east garden. "The woods," she said, "are louder than they should be." They had a son, Matthew, born in 1850. For the first time in nearly a century, Blackwood Hall rang with laughter. But as the boy grew, the pattern returned. He spoke late but counted early. By age 3, he refused to sleep unless the hallway clocks were all wound and ticking. At 5, he told Lydia, "I have 25 years left." She wept for an hour. Samuel slapped the servant who overheard it. Then, on the morning of Matthew's 6th birthday, Lydia was found unconscious in the West Wing. She never woke. The doctor said apoplexy. Samuel blamed the stairs. He buried her beneath a sycamore tree and stopped receiving visitors. Blackwood Hall fell silent again. In the years that followed, Samuel became reclusive. His journal grew darker, more fragmented. He began referring to his family history as a line of quiet executions, and the iron box long gone appeared again in his dreams. In one entry from 1862, he wrote, "What if the box did not contain a thing, but rather prevented it? A vessel for absence, a cage for time itself. Perhaps we were not meant to open it. Perhaps we were never meant to hold it at all." In 1864, a fire broke out in the southern wing. No one knew what caused it. The villagers watched as black smoke curled into the sky, and the bells of Thursby rang out for the first time in decades. When the constables arrived, they found Samuel's body in the study. He had died at 45, but Matthew, then just shy of 15, was nowhere to be found. He was not in the hall, not in the woods, not in any of the surrounding fields. He was simply gone. Blackwood Hall stood empty once more. In 1871, an official from the Crown's Land Office surveyed the property. His notes described the manor as structurally sound but spiritually vacant. In the fireplace, he found a scrap of burnt parchment with only one phrase remaining: "The last map is the one we all walk." Blackwood Hall was eventually sold in 1886 and converted into a sanatorium. The last patient was discharged in 1914. Today, it is a private residence restored and modernized. The blackthorn trees replaced with hydrangeas. The study turned into a sunroom, but locals still say that no owner lives there longer than 30 years. And sometimes, in winter, the new owner claims to hear ticking not from a clock, but from beneath the floor. Reflection colon was the so-called Blackwood curse, a fabrication of generational fear, a psychological inheritance passed like heirloom china? Or was there truly something in that iron box, some ancient knowledge, some trap set by the past that no one should have touched? And if it was just coincidence, why did the ticking never stop? Story 2, The Widow's Bell. How one woman's silence dismantled a village, 1819 to 1861. Section 1, The Bell That Never Rang, 1819 to 1835. You might not find the village of Westmere on most modern maps. Tucked between the chalk hills of Kent and the tidal reaches of the River Stour, it was a place forgotten not by accident, but by decision. Records of its existence survive only in fragments, in church rosters, shipping ledgers, and the personal diaries of nearby parsons. Westmere was, by all accounts, unremarkable. It had one inn, 2 cobblers, a chapel, and a bell that never rang. The bell was the first thing visitors noticed. Hung in a small wooden tower beside the chapel of St. Agnes, it was cast in 1786 and brought from a foundry in Sussex. Yet from the day it was installed, it was never heard. The villagers claimed it was a mourning bell, meant to toll only once the sea reclaimed the land. A poetic answer, perhaps. But no one could explain why the chapel held no funerals and marked no weddings. Not a single documented toll occurred between 1790 and 1860. And then there was the matter of the widow Bellamy. Her name appears in parish notes beginning in 1819. Catherine Bellamy, age 27, widow, no listed occupation, no maiden name, No mention of a husband, only the label widow, written firmly and without comment. She lived in a small thatched cottage near the edge of the woods, where the marsh met the edge of the cultivated land. She attended chapel every Sunday, always. In black, never speaking. For 16 years, Catherine Bellamy was a silent fixture in Westmere. Her presence was as unquestioned as the ticking of a clock in a hallway. Always there, never remarked upon. She received no visitors, paid her dues in full, and left only a single note each quarter in the chapel box, in memory. What was she mourning? The priest, Father Renwick, attempted to learn more. He visited her home once in 1824 and described the interior as entirely devoid of time. No clock, no calendar, no letters. Only a single table, a cupboard of gray china, and a painting of a dark sea with no signature. She did not speak to him, only gestured toward the door when he asked about her husband. After that, he never returned, but she remained. For years, decades, her presence unaging, unchanging. And the bell continued not to ring. Daily life in Westmere, 1820s, 1830s. For all its strangeness, Westmere was a peaceful village. Its population never rose above 200. Men worked as fishermen or ferrymen. Women spun flax or kept herb gardens. There was a single school, maintained by a stern widow named Mrs. Krause, and a local doctor who arrived once a week by horse from Canterbury. Illness was rare. Rain fell in long, whispering curtains, and fog was more common than sun. Most homes in Westmere had 2 rooms, a hearth, and a narrow garden. Meals were simple: eel pie, barley stew, and the occasional apple from the orchard. By the chapel, the villagers were not wealthy, but they were content. And yet, few stayed beyond a generation. Records show that young people left Westmere in unusual numbers. Girls, especially, seemed to vanish by age 16 or 17, not by mystery, but by choice. Gone to Dover was the usual explanation. But letters never came back. The school population have between 1825 and 1830. With no new families arriving to replace them, some began to whisper that Westmere was not a place you built your life. It was a place where lives finished quietly, and always. In the background, Catherine Bellamy moved through, all within hours. Father Renwick was so disturbed by the coincidence that he personally climbed the tower and cut the rope. He then posted a sign, "Let the dead keep silence." The bell was never touched again, but Catherine Bellamy, for the first time in years, changed her routine. She stopped attending chapel. Her windows remained shuttered during daylight. The candlelight now flickered only before dawn. And in December of that same year, someone saw her walking toward the marsh. Alone, barefoot, carrying a bundle wrapped in black linen. When the spring thaw came, a group of boys discovered a small bundle buried beneath the roots of a birch tree in the marsh. Inside was a bell clapper, rusted and etched with strange markings. The same day, Peter Gabb, the boy who had rung the bell, was found drowned in the ferry basin. No one heard him scream. His mouth was full of black silt. What was the connection between Catherine Bellamy and the chapel bell? Why did her silence mirror the village's strange calm, and why did it break only when sound returned to the tower? Was she mourning something that had never left? Was the bell meant to call the dead or keep them at bay? Section 2. The Marsh. Ledger and the Bellkeeper's Ledger, 1836 to 1851. After the ringing of the chapel bell and the death of Peter Gabb, Westmere quietly entered a period that local historians would later call the Fading. No official decree was issued, no catastrophe was declared. But the tone of the village changed. People walked slower. Fewer children were born. The ferry crossed less often. And above all, no one mentioned the bell. What happened to Catherine Bellamy in those years is a matter of fragments and inference. Father Renwick resigned his post in 1837 and retired to Canterbury. His replacement, Father Ames, was a younger and more methodical man who kept detailed notes. In the margin of one sermon outline, he scribbled, "Bellamy House. Shutters closed, windows tarred, garden untended. Candlelight inconsistent. Door never opens, no sound, no known income." He attempted to speak with her in March of that year. He approached with a loaf of bread and a soft knock. He waited 7 minutes. No response. But when he turned to leave, he found a letter placed at the doorstep. It was unsigned. The handwriting was thin and long, like stems of dry grass. It read, "The bell was struck once. That is enough. Do not let it swing again. Let the names fall silent." He kept the note in a drawer with his vestments and never returned. Decline. In Westmere throughout the 1840s, the slow erosion of Westmere became measurable. The ferry schedule was reduced from daily to twice a week. The school had only 6 students by 1845. The orchard yielded half its usual fruit, and most alarmingly, the parish registry records nearly 70 entries marked "left no address." Those who left were never heard from again. One constable from Faversham was sent to investigate reports of squatter settlements along the marsh and noted, "The land has a quality of fatigue, as if it exhales memory in place of air," he described. 3 cottages abandoned mid-meal. In each case, a candle had burned through the plate beneath it, and the chairs were turned toward the corners of the room. No violence. No theft, just absence. By 1849, only 87 residents remained in Westmere. And still, Catherine Bellamy lingered. The ledger in 1850. A minor breakthrough came from a most unexpected place. The ledger of the marsh ferryman Elijah Venn was discovered in a locked cabinet at the inn. Venn had drowned in 1842, but his notebook survived. Water-stained and wrapped in oilskin. Its contents were ordinary at first. Crossings. Coin collected, fog conditions. But beginning in 1836, shortly after the bell rang, his entries took on a darker tone. He began listing names not of passengers, but of those who had gone quiet. In one column, he wrote initials. In another, dates. The final column simply read, "Heard." Examples: MC, the 17th of March. NOJW, the 3rd of April. Yes, low singing. RT, the 9th of May. NOEH, the 22nd of May. NOCB, the 31st of May. No one beside the name CB, presumably Catherine Bellamy. He drew a symbol. A small bell cracked through. The center dot. Was he keeping a record of the vanished? Was he tracking sound in a place that had grown silent? In his final entry, dated just 2 days before his drowning, he wrote, "The bell will toll again, and it will not be by hand. It's not a sound we make, it's a sound we permit. She has heard it, so have I." He drowned crossing alone with no rope and no wind. His ferry drifted for 2 days until it struck a sandbank. A child returns in 1851. For the first time in decades, a child arrived in Westmere. Her name was Annabel Hart, aged 11. She had no family but was sent by the parish orphanage in Maidstone after her previous placement failed. Why Westmere was chosen remains unclear, possibly a clerical error. She was housed in the inn, which by then had only 2 rooms in use. The innkeeper, Mrs. Jewell, recorded that Annabel walked to the marsh every morning and returned with drawings of bells. The drawings were detailed. More than a dozen were preserved on loose parchment. Each bell was different. Some had vines climbing them, others were cracked or submerged in water. One disturbing image showed a chapel tower sunk to its roof in mud, with only the bell visible above the surface. When asked who taught her to draw such things, Annabel replied, "The widow." No one had seen Catherine Bellamy in over a decade. And yet, one evening, a visitor claimed to see 2 candlelights in Bellamy's cottage, one high, one low, as if 2 people were seated across a table. The next morning, Annabel was gone. her bed undisturbed, her drawings folded neatly at the foot. The door to the Bellamy cottage was ajar. Inside, investigators found a teacup still warm, a chair turned slightly from the table, and on the hearth, a small bronze clapper identical to the one buried in the marsh. A letter beside it read. The child rang it without rope or bell. Her voice was enough. What happened to Annabel Hart? Was she lured, protected, or claimed? And what was the nature of Catherine Bellamy's silence? Was it mourning, resistance, or communion? Was she keeping the bell from ringing or waiting for someone who finally could? Section 3. The toll that ended Westmere, 1852 to 1861. In the years following Annabel Hart's disappearance, the village of Westmere entered its final and most inexplicable stage. Parish records became sparse. The remaining families either fled or simply vanished. The ferry was abandoned in the marsh, moss growing across its bow. Father Ames, who had once been a meticulous record keeper, stopped writing altogether. His final entry, dated November 1853, read, "They hear it now. Even without ears they hear it. Some silence is not absence. It is attention." By 1854, only 41 people were confirmed to still live in Westmere, and yet food was delivered. Crops grew without tending. A local farmer reported sheep grazing where there had once been waterlogged soil. It was as though the land had stopped behaving by known rules, or the people had stopped needing what once sustained them. And through it all, no one saw Catherine Bellamy, but she was felt. A light in the marsh, a shifting curtain in the Bellamy cottage, and on occasion, the sound of footsteps on chapel stone. Villagers claimed they heard breathing in the pews during evening prayer, though no one sat beside them. Children left dolls outside the cottage door, and they were always gone by morning. It was in 1857 that the silence changed. The toll on the morning of July 9th. Just after sunrise, the bell of St. Agnes Chapel rang. Once. No rope was found in the tower. No footprints led up the wooden stairs. The clapper was cold. The bell had not moved in decades, and yet every living soul in Westmere heard it. That day, 5 people died. 2 by drowning, though the marshes were low. 1 by fire, though no flame was lit. 2 simply stopped breathing in their sleep. The constable from Canterbury who arrived the following week found the entire village changed. Curtains were drawn, animals untethered, letters unopened on doorsteps. It was as if everyone had simply given up. And then, just as suddenly, came the exodus. Between August and December 1857, the remaining residents of Westmere packed their belongings and left. Some walked. Others boarded the long-abandoned ferry and pushed off into the fog. Few left addresses. None were heard from again. By 1858, the village was officially declared dissolved. The chapel was locked. The inn was boarded. And the only person confirmed to still be living in Westmere was the widow Catherine Bellamy. The final investigation, in 1860, a pair of government cartographers were sent to resurvey the marsh boundaries for new railway expansion. One of them, a man named Hollis, kept a journal that remains in the National Archive today. His notes detail a village overgrown with ash and ivy, but with roofs intact, furniture untouched, and no signs of human decay. More strikingly, he describes entering the Bellamy cottage, which had somehow remained dustless and dry. There, on the center table, they found a ledger. Its pages were thin, aged, and yet clearly written. At the top, the toll record. Beneath it, a list of names, hundreds. Some were Westmere villagers. Others were unknown names of people from elsewhere in Kent, or from as far as Ireland and Scotland. Some names were crossed out. Some had dates. Others had simple notations like, heard no echo, still listening, refused the silence. On the final page was a single line, when the bell is no longer feared, It will ring again. That will be the last. Her candle had long burned down. Her chair was pushed back, as if she had risen to greet someone. But there were no signs of struggle, no remains. Only a pewter key on the windowsill, and beside it, a sprig of sea lavender, Westmere's native. Flower blooming out of season. The disappearance of Westmere B. 1861. Westmere had vanished from the county's new maps. The railway was rerouted. Travelers passed the marsh, but saw no trace of the village. A few surviving structures were eventually claimed by fog and root. Today, the area is marked only by a small wooden sign. Wet ground, unstable soil. No chapel, no inn. No houses. And yet, in the right season, you can still hear a soft metallic sound in the reeds. Some say it's the wind on rusted wire. Others claim it's the sound of a clapper swinging in an invisible bell tower. But for those who study the strange and silent histories, Westmere remains a mystery, not of violence or tragedy, but of listening. It was a village undone by a single toll, a woman who never spoke, and a sound that, once released, could not be silenced again. Reflection. Was Catherine Bellamy the guardian of silence or its prisoner? Did the bell hold back something ancient, or call it forth? Was it sound that destroyed Westmere, or the fear of it? And if silence can listen, what does it remember? Story 3. The Lamplighter's Children. Why no one slept on Bingham Street. 1844 to 1872, Section 1. Gaslight and Shadows. 1844 to 1856, in the narrow borough of Southwark. Just south of the Thames, Bingham Street had once been nothing more than a muddy footpath lined with coal sheds and workhouses. But in 1844, the city's new lighting initiative transformed it. Gas lamps, tall and elegant, were installed every 30 yards, turning the street into one of the first in London to be fully illuminated after dusk. The effort was seen as a triumph of progress, a blow against the city's shadowed alleys and unsavory reputations. But as the lights came on, something else began to stir. That same year, a lamplighter named Josiah Tripp was assigned to Bingham Street. He was a former sailor turned city laborer, known for his punctuality and quiet demeanor. He lived at the far end of the street with his wife, May, and their 3 children, Ada, Joseph, and infant Harold. Every evening, Josiah lit the lamps in sequence 22, in all starting at the eastern end, and finishing by the old cemetery wall. At first, everything went as expected, but within 3 months of the lighting installation, the residents of Bingham Street began to complain of sleep disturbances. It started with restlessness, people waking up at odd hours, unable to return to sleep. Then came the walking. Men and women were found standing in their gardens at midnight, barefoot, gazing silently at the lamplight. Children were caught rearranging furniture at 3 a.m., with no memory of doing so. Dr. Ellery, a local physician, recorded in his journal, "They are not possessed nor ill, but afflicted by a kind of waking dream. The lights seem to anchor them in waking hours, even when their bodies beg for rest." But what made the case stranger was that this only happened to those living on Bingham Street. People 1 street over, on Willoughby Lane or Crossbell Row, slept soundly. The insomnia was confined to a single stretch, barely 500 feet long, and Josiah Tripp's children were among the worst affected. The lamplighter's house. The Tripp family resided at No. 24 Bingham Street, a modest brick dwelling with lace-curtained windows and a tidy vegetable garden. But as the gas lamps flickered through their window panes, the children began to change. Ada, the eldest at 9, began sleep-talking in a language May could not recognize. She repeated numbers, like coordinates, or perhaps times, 11 and 31, 17 and 6. Always 22. Joseph, aged 6, was found outside the house one morning with his arms wrapped around a lamppost. He had no memory of leaving bed. When asked why he was out there, he said, "The light keeps me from falling." And Harold, barely one, stopped, crying, completely. He stared at the window as if listening for something only he could hear. Josiah himself became deeply unsettled by the routine of his work. He began noting in his journal, some lights feel different. Some resist the match. Others flare too quickly. One near the cemetery flickers even when there is no wind. He requested reassignment in 1846. His petition was denied. By 1847, 5 homes on Bingham Street stood empty. The families had moved without explanation, often leaving furniture behind. One woman, a seamstress named Gwendolyn Key, abandoned her home in the middle of a winter night. Her neighbor later found a note scrawled into her wall with chalk. The lights call, but they don't show. They reveal nothing but refuse to let us sleep. The gas company investigation in 1850. The South London Gasworks dispatched engineers to investigate the complaints. The official report stated that the lamps were functioning within expected parameters. However, one engineer, Thomas Beach, later submitted a private addendum. The light on Bingham Street is unusually cold. It burns with a sharpness I've not seen before. There's a resonance too like the hiss of steam, but without heat. I do not trust it. He died 2 weeks later in an unrelated industrial accident. That same year, Ada Tripp vanished. She had been asleep in her bed, sharing a room with her younger brothers. May awoke to find the door open, Ada's shoes on the floor, and her pillow still warm. A search turned up nothing. No signs of forced entry. No footprints in the frost. Josiah, overwhelmed with grief, refused to light the lamps that evening. The city assigned a temporary replacement. But when he reached the post outside No. 24, his lamp refused to light. Every other lamp worked perfectly. Josiah returned to his post the following night. He lit all 22 lamps. But he added a new step to his routine. He spoke his daughter's name aloud before striking each match. Ada, he whispered. If you see me, follow the light. What was it about the gas lamps on Bingham Street that disturbed sleep and stole dreams? Were they merely a mechanical oddity, or did they stir something ancient in the minds of those who lived beneath them? And why did Josiah's children hear something no one else could? Section 2. The Map of the Lamps, 1856 to 1865. By the spring of 1856, the people of Bingham Street had learned to live with their strange insomnia. It became part of the neighborhood's rhythm. Yawns at breakfast, dozing heads on prayer benches, children nodding off in class but rising again at midnight with eyes wide and blank. Those who could afford to leave, left. Those who stayed adapted. Sleep became fragmented, a few minutes here and there, stolen between lamplight pulses, but Josiah Tripp's household remained locked in its own orbit of sorrow. It had been 6 years since Ada vanished, and May had grown silent. Her hands, once so lively in the garden, trembled constantly. Harold no longer spoke at all. He stared at nothing, day or night, as if waiting for a reply. Joseph, now a wiry, quiet teenager, had taken to following his father on lamplighting rounds, not out of duty, but fascination. One evening, as Josiah lit the final lamp by the cemetery wall, Joseph asked, "Why do they all hum the same note?" Josiah paused. He hadn't heard it before, but when he stood very still, he did notice something. A vibration, not quite sound, not quite air. A resonance deep within the pole. The same in everyone. That night, he opened his journal and began to sketch. The grid Josiah's sketches started with simple layouts, lamp positions, alleyways, house numbers. But over the following months, they grew stranger. He began drawing lines between the lamps, arcs, angles, spirals. One diagram, labeled Nightfall Arrangement, showed the lampposts forming a geometric shape, an irregular dodecagon, with his house at its exact center. He took his diagrams to Dr. Ellery, now retired, who dismissed them as geometric paranoia. But another man, a mathematics tutor named Mr. Sedge from Blackfriars took interest. He compared the shapes to known astronomical alignments. "There's a rhythm here," he said. "Not light but time. You've charted intervals. This ... This is a kind of clock." Josiah hadn't thought of it that way, but it made a disturbing sort of sense. Each lamp lit at the same time each evening. Each flickered at slightly different intervals. Some went out prematurely, others resisted being lit. What if the pattern wasn't mechanical but intentional? What if someone or something was measuring something through the light? The children of the street in 1858. A second child vanished. Thomas Brigg, aged 8, was last seen standing outside his home in his nightclothes, staring up at the lamp nearest his window. His mother swore she had tucked him into bed. He left behind. No footprints, no trace. Only a chalk circle drawn in front of the lamp base, divided into quarters. Police chalked it up to abduction or misadventure. But locals whispered something different. The lamps are counting, and the children hear the numbers. In the same year, Harold Tripp, now 14, began drawing. He used charcoal, soot, ink, anything he could find. His papers were covered in arcs, spirals, and dots. But he never drew people. Only posts, lamps, and occasionally a single figure, a tall, faceless silhouette beneath the light. His father once asked who it was. Harold answered, "The one who never sleeps." The lamplighters shift in 1861. Josiah Tripp was officially removed from his post. The Gaslight Company, in response to growing public concern, replaced all original Bingham Street lamps with a newer model. They assured residents that any disturbances were caused by outdated technology. But the new lamps made no difference. People still woke in the middle of the night, drawn to the window. A new family, the Winstons, moved into No. 28 and left within a week, citing inexplicable unease and a daughter who spoke in her sleep. "I'm not supposed to see thee." Next light. Meanwhile, Josiah, freed from his official duties, became consumed by his map. His journals filled with notes like, "Lamp number 3 stutters now, someone else is watching. The arc has shifted, one spoke is missing. What happens when they all go out at once?" In 1863, Joseph, his only remaining child, disappeared. May had left town years earlier to live with relatives in Manchester, unable to bear another day in the house. That left only father and son. Josiah swore Joseph had gone out for air. A witness saw him walking barefoot toward the cemetery, lamp head tilted up, eyes closed. He was never seen again. That night, Josiah did something strange. He went to each lamp. One by one, he extinguished them. 20-1 went dark. The 22nd, the one nearest his home, refused to go out. The broken pattern in the months that followed. Strange things stopped happening. People began sleeping again. The neighborhood quieted. Those who had endured the sleepless decades remarked that something had let go. Children slept. Lamps flickered normally. Night returned to darkness. Josiah never lit another match. He boarded up his home and wrote letters to No. 1. The neighbors left food at his gate. He died in 1865, his journal clutched in one hand, and in the other, a hand-drawn map of the street, with one lamp circled in red. Beneath it, the words, "The light isn't from here." The last line of his journal reads, "The lamps were not made to see. They were made so it could see us." Why did gaslight disturb only Bingham Street? Was it an accident of design, or did someone long ago place those lamps for a purpose? And what did the children hear when they stood beneath them? Section 3. The Light That Watches, 1865 to 1872. After the death of Josiah Tripp in 1865, Bingham Street slowly began to shed its reputation as a place of uneasy nights. The lamplighter's house was boarded up, and no one offered to buy it. Over time, wild ivy climbed its walls, and the windows went dark. But something had shifted. The strange sleeplessness that had defined the street for more than 20 years seemed to lift Dot at least. For a while, a few residents remarked that the air felt heavier on certain nights, that the new lamps hissed more loudly than they should, that shadows moved slightly out of sync with their sources. But they said nothing. After what had happened to the Tripp family, first Ada, then Joseph, and finally Harold, no one wanted to stir old fears. The gas company declared the street stable. The medical journals stopped writing about the Bingham sleep disturbance. Even Dr. Ellery, once a staunch believer in the anomaly, referred to it as a resolved hysteria of place. But beneath the calm, something waited. The map resurfaces in 1868. A schoolteacher named Miss Lillian Sorrell moved into No. 19 Bingham Street. She was unmarried, in her 30s, and had no knowledge of the street's strange past. But she kept a journal, daily observations, classroom frustrations, botanical notes. In an entry dated March 3, 1869, she wrote, "Found an envelope beneath a floorboard while cleaning. Contained several hand-drawn maps of the street and strange notes, doodles of lampposts, arrows, numbers. One line reads, 'They tilt at midnight.' What could that mean?" She filed the envelope away and thought little of it. Until the dreams began. She dreamed of the street, but from above, as though looking down on it from a great height. She could see the lampposts like pegs in a board. Some were glowing. Some were not. The pattern shifted each night. Sometimes it formed letters. Once, a face. She dreamed she was walking the street barefoot, just like the children before her. Always toward the last lamp. In May, she confided in a colleague that she had started waking up standing at her window, her hands pressed to the glass, staring at the post directly outside. The final tally between 1869 and 1871, 5 residents of Bingham Street moved away suddenly. A man named Henry Lee left a note. "There is an observer in the light." A child named Emmett, aged 10, was heard saying to his younger sister, "Don't look at the lamp too long. It's not the light that blinds, it's the thing behind it." No one knew what he meant, but his mother wrote the phrase down. She kept it in her purse for years. In February 1872, the final recorded incident occurred. Miss Sorrell, the schoolteacher, vanished. Her neighbors noticed her absence after 3 days. When constables entered her home, they found no signs of struggle. The bed was made. A kettle had boiled dry on the stove. On the kitchen table sat a small wooden box. Inside was the envelope of lamp maps she had found 3 years earlier. Tucked among them was a final page. Written in her own hand. It read, "There's one lamp left that does not cast a shadow. I stood beneath it last night. I felt something behind my eyes. I think it is watching us to learn how to sleep." She was never found. Epilogue. The street today. By the 1880s, Bingham Street had changed again. The gas lamps were replaced with electric bulbs in 1895. Most of the old homes were demolished in the post-war years. Today, only the outline of the original street remains. It's lined with modern flats and chain cafes, but the last original lamppost still stands. It's rusted, its base cracked. It doesn't connect to the modern electrical grid, yet it's never been removed. Locals call it the listener. Sometimes it flickers, even on clear nights, even when nothing else does, and when it does, dogs refuse to walk past. Infants cry for no reason. And a few sensitive souls claim they can hear a whisper, not a voice, but a rhythm, a pulse, like someone counting, waiting, rehearsing the shapes of sleep. Reflection colon. Was Josiah Tripp merely a grieving father, trying to find meaning in shadows? Or did he uncover something too vast, too old, to name? Were the gas lamps on Bingham Street a mechanical failure or a pattern placed with intent? And if the light was never meant to help us see, what was it showing? Something else?